Hello everyone. Seeing a few people we know here. Hi, Rebecca. And who have we got? Michael, Freya. Thanks so much, guys, for joining us. As you'll probably see, we're just doing, right. Feel free, I mean, if you guys, you can have your cameras on, but I'm going to ask that when we do questions for the Q&A, if people wouldn't mind sort of typing it into the chat, just because that then gives me a chance to sort of see how to structure what we're going to say and how it's going to roll from there.
And take out all the rude ones.
Yeah, yeah. No, I know everybody in this group, and it's such a lovely group of people. And honestly, I'm so grateful that you're giving up a bit of time on a Friday this close to Christmas to come and have a chat. But you know, I think I kind of wanted this to be our end of year session, because so many amazing things have happened this year, and everybody has done such great work and supportive stuff with the community. We've had the amazing, like the mentoring scheme. We had our partnership scheme between the creative conservationists in the nature maker crowd and then our wildlife bloggers, kind of some great pairings where people have worked together and supported one another. So we've had the mentor program, we've had the book, obviously, and thanks Will. Obviously Will Travers is here with us, who also contributed to the book, which I'm so happy to have got your story. You're my last place, Will, in the book. I was holding a space for you and thinking, oh, fingers crossed that you're going to be able to find the time to do it. So I was so glad when that happened. And yeah, so we've done all these great things, and we've had our newsletters and our Facebook chats and Twitter chats and everything else. And I kind of felt like we needed to do something to end up the year and feel inspired into next year. So that's why I asked Will along. I'm going to see if we get a couple more in the waiting room now. Oh, hello Liv, you've just joined us. Hi, so hopefully, you know, we'll kick off in a minute, but hopefully that'll be most people. Like I say, we will be recording. Hopefully that's okay with everybody. I did say on the message beforehand that we'll be recording to send it round to those of us who can't be here. There's a few people in Australia and India and in America that the time just didn't quite work out. So we'll be recording for their benefit. But so I'll kick off with introducing Will. So Will is the president and co-founder of Born Free Foundation. He's the president of the Species Survival Network and of Born Free USA, among many other things. And you know, I thought I'd just condense it down to that, if that's okay, because there were so many things that I thought I could be saying. So yeah, and of course, Will has been supportive of our wildlife blog crowd community, you know, since it came into existence, and has helped with, you know, contributing a piece to the book, and of course getting his wonderful, inspiring mother Virginia to write our epilogue. I'm pretty sure that you helped to twist her arm to get her to write a piece.
Needed no twisting. Needed no twisting.
Great. Well, yeah, so I'm going to kick off then with a couple of questions, but everybody else, if you'd like to ask something, or you know, just want to take the opportunity of having someone here to speak to who probably has this incredible wealth of knowledge that, you know, I certainly don't, and certainly has the experience of working with across so many different projects. So, well, to kick off, do you want to tell us a little bit about anything that I have missed in terms of what it is you're doing at the moment, and a little bit about Born Free, because obviously that is the center of so much of probably what we're going to do this evening.
Well, firstly, thank you, Kate, for inviting me along, and it's nice to see you all on this Zoom call. I hope you're all safe, and I hope you're planning a safe and family-friendly Christmas, prioritizing as I saw someone say the other day, prioritizing the things that really matter. So yes, without further ado, what am I up to at the moment? I mean, literally, what am I up to at the moment? I am, we've just, well, I should say that Kate, you probably all know this, but Kate is one of our much valued trustees at the Born Free Foundation. So we are We meet on a regular basis. In fact, you know, we had a board meeting this last week on Wednesday for 6 hours, which was actually great. It was a really good board meeting. We got a lot of interesting things done, plans for 2022. What am I doing right now? I'm also a founder of a little tiny charity called the Hummingbird Initiative, which is a development charity. Very low, you know, low level, as in it's real grassroots stuff. It's working with just one community in Kenya at the moment on things like education, sanitation, water, basic agricultural work to try and improve people's lives. And we have two other trustees, and we have a fantastic team of 2 in Kenya, Isaac and Purity, who are go-to on the ground and do all the implementation. So then we do that. As you mentioned, Born for USA. Born for USA is being very busy recently, particularly on things like, well, I don't know, you can put your hands up, those of you who are on camera, who has seen any of the Tiger King shows on Netflix? Yeah, a few people. So yeah, I mean, don't punish yourself because it's pretty grim stuff. But Tiger King, and then Tiger King 2, the new series, which frankly is nothing like the first series. The first series focused on the animals far more, and the second series is all about the personalities and the crazy people who can keep multiple big cats in their backyards and carry weapons strapped to their sides and take apparently copious amounts of drugs and raise huge amounts of money and spend it on themselves. Tiger King in the States has caused a real furore, and there is a piece of legislation sitting before the government there, both at Congress and Senate, called the Big Cat Public Safety Act. And we are crossing every finger that's going to in the hope that this will get passed in 2022. And what it will effectively do is mean that keeping big cats like tigers and lions as private pets in your backyard, breeding from them, taking cubs to the mall to have photographs taken with them, etc., that will become illegal. I'm also very focused on what's going on in South Africa at the moment, Kate, because of course you may have heard that the minister in South Africa, Barbara Creecy, the environment minister, has declared that there will be an end to the canned hunting of lions, predominantly lions. There are actually some tigers in these captive breeding facilities. And for those of you who are not aware, canned hunting is the breeding and raising of big cats in captivity. The little cubs are taken away from the mother just days after birth. They're raised by volunteers who think that they're looking after abandoned animals. They're not abandoned at all. When they get too big for the, cuddling in the bedroom scenario and bottle feeding 5 times a day, they go into a walking with program. So you walk with an adolescent lion and you pay to do that. You pay to be the volunteer that looks after the little cub. You pay to walk with the adolescents, and then someone pays to shoot the animal in an enclosure from which it cannot escape at a discount compared to a wild lion, and the trophy goes home. And then the body parts, not the trophy, but the rest of the body parts, at least until recently, were sold to Southeast Asia for traditional Asian medicine. It's a pretty brutal, horrid, disgusting form of animal exploitation. The good news is that the minister has said it will come to an end. The bad news is they didn't say that 15 years ago when they should have. And there are now 300 facilities in South Africa with between 10 and 12,000 lions. And if they close it down, you will understand how challenging that will be from a welfare point of view, because we have a rescue center and 2 rescue centers in, actually 2.5 rescue centers in South Africa. And we have about 25 big cats there, lions and leopards. And to do the job properly, it costs around £10,000 a year to look after a big cat. So that's a big investment by Born Free. That's getting on for £250,000 a year to look after these animals that have come from zoos, and a zoo that closed in South Africa, in fact. We got 2 leopards from there. 1 lion we got from a canned hunt. I can't imagine how we're going to be able to raise the funds necessary to do the job properly, to look after 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, however many big cats end up being redundant after the canned hunting industry comes to a close. One other thing I'm doing, which is not to do with animals, is I'm involved in supporting some refugees coming out of Afghanistan at the moment. Currently they're in Pakistan. And that seems to be something that, you know, you think all I have to do is to help them get to safety. But then, of course, you realize that that's only step 1, because step 2 is, do they have all the right paperwork? And then the answer is no. And then where are they going to go eventually? Because they can't all stay in Pakistan. We have to find. Anyway, there's just a few of the things that are going on at the moment, along with, you know, stuff that Virginia and I do, promoting some books. Still time to buy some books for Christmas if you haven't. Yeah, it's fantastic, but it is relentless. It's exhausting.
We appreciate you giving the time to come and chat to us, because I know exactly how busy you are. But
Born Free is very, you know, Born Free is very busy. I should tell you that next year, just so that I don't forget this, next year, 2022, we are dedicating the year as Year of the Lion. We're dedicating it in memory of my late father, who would have been 100 had he lived, on the 3rd of January. And we're sort of highlighting it with an exhibition. It's going to be amazing. These are life-size lion bronzes made by 2 Australian sculptors called Gillian Mark. Their name's Gillian Mark, and they are going to be in London for the first 3 months of the year, at Millennium Gardens. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, they will move to Edinburgh, and then to Cardiff, and then possibly to Belfast. We've sort of realized that it's all too easy for, when you're based in sort of the South, to think that the whole world is about the South. And of course it isn't. In fact, my family on my father's side are Geordies. And we really important that we don't make the whole world about London, which I think is what perhaps the government thinks it is. So they're wrong.
That's what's been so wonderful about running this community, is that we've been able to bring together lots of different people from all over the world, and not just the UK, and being able to do sort of the stuff that we've done online and the book as well, and get those voices from those different places has been amazing. And
yeah, congratulations on the book, by the way. Seriously.
You know, it's a team
we
effort.
love the book. We love the book. I've given away my copy though, Kate.
I'll have to send you another one then.
I've given it to my daughter.
Oh, and I hope she enjoys it.
Yeah.
So I kind of love actually talking about the bronzes, because like I said, we also had earlier this year, we launched the Nature Maker Crowd, which was our sort of sister community of, there was a lot of people who wanted to kind of get involved with being in part of a community of creative storytellers. But we were doing a lot of stuff that was centered. I was doing blog clinics that was about sort of writing and hosting a blog, and we were doing sort of social media, Twitter hours where people were talking about their social media tips. And there was people saying, well, we tell stories through other means, not necessarily just through writing and putting pictures on Instagram, but some of us tell stories through art or sculpting or whatever. So that's kind of why we introduced that community. But obviously a big part of Born Free is storytelling, and storytelling in lots of different ways. Obviously you've mentioned the bronzes. You mentioned canned hunting, and there was, I don't know if people have seen it, but there was the incredible animation that Born Free put out that was, you know, completely, I mean, it was shocking, it was effective, and I'm sure went a long way to sort of really highlighting an issue and making change. So
if you haven't seen that, you know, it's on our website. It's called The Bitter Bond. It's only 2 minutes long, but at the last count, it had been seen by 11 million people.
And that's exactly an example how storytelling really can change. And of course, like, you know, sort of change the world, change the ideas of people, really reach the public. And of course, Born Free started with storytelling, you know, very much people would have, you know, presumably either heard of the film or the song. You know, like I know there are people, when I met my husband, who's a musician, he knew of the song and hadn't seen the film. So I sat him down and made him watch the film. So obviously people come into Born Free for different ways. So I guess let's go back to the start and sort of say how did Born Free start, and how did storytelling come into the beginning of starting this whole Born Free sort of charity and Born Free family that, you know, we very much call it the Born Free family, don't we?
Yeah, we really do. Well, I mean, of course, it wasn't us that started it in the original sense. It was George and Joy Adamson and their extraordinary adventure against the odds, returning Elsa, the lioness, to the wild when everyone said it couldn't be done. And then George wrote his diaries about that, and Joy then used all the information that George had captured to write her books, her famous books, Born Free, Living Free, and then Forever Free. And the rights got picked up by Columbia and a film was made. And my mum and dad were asked if they would like to play the parts of George and Joy. And I think without hesitation, deviation or repetition, they said yes. And so we ended up as a family. My sister, my middle brother, my little brother hadn't been born at that time, and mum and dad, we went to Kenya for nearly a year while the film was made in 1964. And I think that's when I got bitten by the bug, whatever it is, the wildlife bug. And of course, once you're bitten, you really don't ever want to be cured, because it's just an extraordinary opportunity to explore the natural world, to think about the natural world, and in our case, ultimately to do something hopefully positive to help protect the natural world and to stop individual animal suffering. But although lions were the genesis of this, because of the film, it wasn't actually a lion that was the start of Born Free, the organization. The start was an elephant at the London Zoo. She'd been caught from the wild as a 2-year-old, as a gift to the London Zoo, and my mum and dad were in Kenya in the late 60s to make a film, a sort of light-hearted family film which involved elephants, and they were hoping that there would be an elephant that could be in the film. And here was this little elephant called Poli Poli, running around the trapper's yard terrified. She was calmed down by David Sheldrake, the famous David Sheldrake, husband of Daphne Sheldrake, late Dame Daphne Sheldrake, extraordinary friend and wonderful animal person. And after film, so she came to the film, and when filming was over about 6 or 7 weeks later, my mum and dad said to the government, please, can we buy her from you, and we'll give her to the Sheldrakes and she can be returned to the wild. And the government said yes, that's possible, but because we've made a commitment to the London Zoo, we will go and capture another infant elephant. And the thought of another elephant family enduring a baby being taken away from them was simply too much on all levels. So sadly and regretfully, we sort of backed off, and Poli Poli came to London Zoo. And then some years later, about 12 years, more than 12 years later, we heard that she was very difficult to manage and she'd become unruly, and that she might even be put down. And we couldn't understand it. Mum and Dad hadn't been to the zoo to see her, because they'd said, look, let her form alliances with her keepers and with other elephants. You know, we will just be a sort of constant reminder of what could have been. But on the basis of that information, they went up to see her and called her name. And there's this very amazing picture taken by the Daily Mail of this elephant reaching out her trunk over the moat to my mum and dad's outstretched hands on the outside of the moat, and sort of just almost touching. And so we launched a campaign to have her hopefully sent back to Africa. The zoo refused. They said, well, no, she'll be poached. I mean, she had no tusk on one side. It was completely broken. And on the other side, she had about, I don't know, 6 inches of a broken tusk. I don't think she would have been poached. But anyway, you know, you can't argue with the zoo. But they did agree ultimately to move her to Whipsnade, which is, as you may know, is the country arm of the London Zoo, where there was it was a bigger enclosure, not massive, but bigger, and there were other elephants, because she'd been on her own for more than a year at the London facility, Regent's Park facility, and they tried to move her, and they kept her standing too long, and it didn't work, and she collapsed. And the army was called in to try and get her back on her feet, and she hobbled around her enclosure for a week, having damaged her foot, and then they gave her a general anesthetic to check on the foot, and she didn't respond after that, and she said she'd lost the will to live, and she was euthanized in the elephant house. She was the last African elephant at the London Zoo, and we just thought, how is that possible, that in this, what we thought then, modern day and age, we can create a situation where a teenage elephant who should be with her family, you know, in the wild, yes, with all the risks that runs, but she should be in the wild with her family. You I'm sure know that female elephants largely live with their families for their entire lives, unless they split the whole family in half, and then some of the females take their own way. How is this possible? So we launched a tiny organization at the time. It wasn't even a charity. It was like a not-for-profit company called Zoo Check, to check on zoos and to sort of stop. So check as in stop the worst abuse, and check as in what on earth is going on. And we just found so much that was wrong. We said that we would live or die by public support, and the then director of the zoo, David Jones, said, "Well, we said, oh, this will be a 9-day wonder. You won't exist." 37 years later, and he's now in America, retired. And we started to look at what was going on in zoos. We found, you know, really shocking situations, like 80%, 90% of the polar bears in British zoos at the time were showing extensive stereotypic pacing, head bobbing, weaving behavior. They were frankly mentally unstable because of the environment that they had to endure, that artificial environment. We found dolphins in terrible circumstances. We found giraffe constantly licking the paint or the bars of their enclosures, their tiny little enclosures. We found great apes that were doing coprophagy, which is playing with their feces as if it's a toy, or vomiting and then re-ingesting the vomit. I mean, very distressing behaviors. And we published. We found people who could write it better than we could, because we didn't know really what we were looking at. We sort of had a gut sense of what it was, but we didn't really know. So we found people who could tell that story for us, going back to your point about storytelling. And suddenly we found that we had more support than we thought we might have. You know, it wasn't just 50 people in a room shouting into the wind. Then there were 500 of us, and then there were 1,000, and then there were more. And today we probably have in the order of 300,000 people following us. No, we have more than that. We have 365,000 followers on Facebook. We have 155,000 on Instagram. We have 30,000 people who adopt animals with us. We have 140,000 people on Twitter. So there is a large community of caring individuals who are out there who are not satisfied with what's going on to the natural world and to the natural world that we confine. And so we keep on telling that story, retelling it and reinventing it and retelling that story, Kate, because I think that's what motivates people, that gets people interested. And then we have to move them from being interested into wanting to do something about it.
I was going to mention as well, actually, because obviously we're talking about ways of retelling that story. There was a video that went out, I think, early on in the pandemic, where Born Free worked with Aardman Animation, who do Wallace and Gromit and Creature Comforts, and you actually utilized the kind of the story of the pandemic in the sense that we were all feeling with lockdown to make a Creature Comforts, wasn't it? The animation there. So that's another interesting way of sort of turning what's going on around. I mean, how do you keep evolving that story? I mean, and I wanted to say to everyone as well, if you're on here and you want to put any questions to Will, I'm keeping an eye on the chat. Please do sort of ask away, and it can be what we're talking about or anything else that you kind of have in your head that you want to put forward. Please do pop on there and ask questions as well. But
yeah, so the Aardman thing was, I think, was really effective, because it's always hard to put yourself, to transpose yourself into the situation faced by an animal in a zoo. But then, strangely and tragically, of course, and tragically for so many people around the world, in the UK and beyond, the pandemic has made us change our ways of living our lives. And we are living, as we all know now, on a kind of roller coaster, sort of easing off, and it seems like it might be getting back to some kind of social normality, and then, oh no, we're going to have to go into a more restricted environment. 90,000 cases of Omicron and COVID yesterday, 89,000. But it made us think that this must resonate with the lives that animals in captivity endure. We have sort of glimpsed what it might be like not to have the kind of freedoms that we enjoy and that we will fight for, the freedoms of society. And what Aardman very cleverly did is they went and got some voices from people talking about their experience under lockdown, and then they transposed those voices into the animal characters, the elephant, the orca, the killer whale, the lemurs, and others at the zoo, and somehow it kind of worked. You got these are real voices of real people, but they might actually be saying what those animals are thinking if they could only talk to us and tell us what they were feeling. So it was very effective. And this is what we do. We have to keep on reinventing ways of telling our stories and giving our perspective, and hoping that this will ultimately lead to the changes in society backed up by the changes in law. I mean, an interesting thing right now, as in just in the last few days, is after it having been announced in the government's manifesto 2 years ago, and then subsequently in the Queen's speech in May, the announcement that there will be a ban on the import of hunting trophies into this country will go ahead. We don't know exactly when, but we now have much more detail. We know which species will be covered, and it's not just 5, 10, 15, or 20 species. It's 7,000 species will be prohibited under the new legislation when it is enacted. And that reflects the views of the public. 80%, 80+% of people don't think we should be participating in trophy hunting by allowing those trophies to come into the country. We can't stop countries that allow trophy hunting from carrying on that activity. That's their sovereign right. They can do that. I don't like it. I wish I could stop it, but I can't. That's their decision. But what we can do is we can say no to the import of trophies and remove ourselves from participating in an activity as a society that frankly should have been consigned to the history books a long time ago.
And it's interesting as well, we're actually getting quite a few things that are kind of positive steps now. I mean, obviously after years and years and, many campaigns and lots of disappointment over the years of things not sort of working out the way that we'd want to, what we're seeing now is that the dial sort of shift more towards, like we were saying, things like the ending of imports, the changing of legislation to stop the can hunting industry and things that we've mentioned. So it does sort of feel like there is sort of a change and the need to wish. What do you sort of attribute that to? I mean, obviously we're seeing the people that are all involved here are big storytellers and engage with lots of audiences, and I'm hoping across the board, like me, that I'm seeing a lot more awareness. Is it that's kind of changing things? Is it the awareness, or is it the way that people are receiving things through their own experience? Or
yeah, it's probably a combination of many things. I mean, when I think back to when we started, there were 4 terrestrial television channels, and that was it. You know, there was no satellite, there was no cable, there was no streaming. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have social media. So the opportunities now to tell stories and to reach audiences is so much greater and so much more diverse. And of course, that can be used in a good way. And of course, it can be used in a bad way. I mean, let's use it in a good way. And on top of that, we've had the body of work from people like Sir David Attenborough for 40, 50 years, telling us about the natural world, explaining it to us, showing us the sort of miracle that is out there, the diversity of life on Earth, and now, more recently, the peril that it's in, and that peril is entirely down to us. I mean, we are the biggest single threat to all other life forms on the planet. And belatedly, we have woken up to it. And certainly the younger generations have picked up on this. We have a fantastic youth ambassador, Bella Lack. If you don't follow Bella on Twitter or Instagram, I recommend that you do. She's just in a new film, which will come out here, I hope, fairly soon. They've launched it in Europe. It was made by a French company. And it's her as a 17-year-old with a young boy going around and kind of absorbing what is going on with our planet and questioning and asking. I shared a platform with her up at COP26 in Glasgow recently. She is the most articulate and amazing 18-year-old. I mean, she uses language and terms that I've never even heard of, but once she explains it, they all make sense. So we're telling those stories relentlessly, and I think that government has a duty to respond to the wishes of the people. That's what I think government is there to do. And if enough people say, for example, that they don't want to see any wild animals in circuses, then government has a duty to respond to that. And it has. We now have legislation that bans the use of wild animals in circuses.
I wanted to mention on the note of Bella as well, that Bella is a member of our wildlife blogger crowd community, and also wrote a piece in the book, The Dominant Male, which is about an orangutan. It's by Bella, and she is quite a sort of a force of nature of her own. We've got a couple of questions come in. So Sally has asked, how does Born Free deal with arguments around needing zoos for conservation? Seems to me that zoos mostly don't have much value in helping real conservation, but how do you tackle that belief?
Well, the first thing I would do is suggest going to the Born Free website, because we've produced some very good reports in the last 12 months, one of which looks at almost exactly at this issue and talks about, just what is the conservation dividend, as we call it, from zoos. And I can tell you that the better zoos, so the sort of really the top tier in the zoo community, even they, on average, only invest about 5% of their revenue in the protection of endangered species in the wild. And you'd have thought it would be much more, but it isn't. And many zoos make almost no attempt at contributing to conservation in any meaningful way. In fact, when you get a license, I'm talking about UK zoos, when you get a zoo license, there is a section in it which talks about the commitment of the zoo to conservation, and you have to fulfill, there are 5 criteria that you have to pay attention to, but the tragedy is you only have to fulfill one of them. You can fulfill more, but to get your license, as far as conservation is concerned, you only have to tick the box for one of them. And one of them is share information. As long as you share information, you can get a tick in the conservation box criteria towards your zoo license. It hardly seems enough, in my view. And so we've been pushing the government not only to upgrade the criteria to make them stronger, but to also say you have to fulfill 3. Doesn't seem unreasonable to me that you should have to meet 3 of the 5 criteria in order to get the tick in the box. So, and then I look at the, you know, to try and answer this question, which is a really good question. I look at the outcomes from zoos. How many tigers have been, we've been breeding tigers in captivity forever, but seriously in a coordinated way, probably for the last 50 years. How many tigers have been returned successfully to the wild from zoos? And the answer is none. How many elephants have been born in captivity in zoos and been returned to the wild? The answer is none. And so how many polar bears? How many jaguar? How many lions? And the answer is none. And so if you sort of put that on one side of the ledger, and then you look at what they will claim are the successes, and there are a handful where captive breeding has played a role. The Hawaiian goose is one of them, the nene. The black-footed ferret in America is another, although largely bred in a specialist breeding center and then returned to the wild, away from sort of public gaze. The Mauritius kestrel is another. And I don't decry any of this. I don't say, you know, I'd rather they went extinct. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying that the 10,000 zoos that exist around the world, containing literally millions of animals, have made a very poor show of putting their money where their mouth is and investing in the protection of natural habitats at a significant level, and efforts to conserve species in their natural habitats. Because I tell you one thing is for sure, and we wrote this down 3 decades ago, nearly. We called it the ladder of compromise. If you accept that the wild is the wild is what you want, even though it may be challenged in many ways, the wild is your objective, is to keep wildlife in the wild, which is our slogan. And then you intervene. You intervene in some way. So you make it a national park. And then, because that's a struggle, you make it an intensive protection zone. And then you put up some fences around it. And these are all steps away from it being the wild, unadulterated. And then you say, well, it's still too risky. We're going to have to take animals out, but we'll move them to a safe zone in country. And then you say, well, that's no good either. We're going to have to move them to zoos. And we're going to keep them in zoos, and we're going to breed them in captivity. And then, of course, we will return. I tell you what, by the time you've got down to the zoo end of the equation, the chances of a species going back up the ladder to the wild are extremely remote. And it's really hard and expensive to do. One of the examples that I remember is the golden lion tamarind, which is a small primate from the coastal rainforests of South America, Brazil, and bred for multiple generations in captivity. And then they said, right, we have enough, so we're going to try and reintroduce them to the wild. And they took animals back, and they released a fairly good number. I cannot say for sure. Something in my head says it was about 100. And they found that they were dying like flies. Literally, they were falling out of the trees and dying. And but how? I mean, you know, these are healthy animals. They're not diseased. They've been given the best. And of course, in a sense, what had happened was that in captivity, they had been given a very structured captive environment, which included branches that never moved, trees that never swayed in the wind. And literally, these little primates were jumping from one tree to the branch of another. And when that branch moved, they let go because they didn't know what was going on. and they fell and killed themselves. The cost analysis, apart from the animal life cost, was that it was about $160,000 per animal that project cost. You know, I was talking about looking after lions in captivity at £10,000 a year. Well, this was costing about $160,000 per animal. And to be fair, they've learned from that and they've improved the system and they've kind of got it right, better. But wow, that is a big learning curve. And it just tells me you really need to put all your effort and your time and your resources into keeping wildlife in its natural environment and trying to address whatever the factors are that are against the species in its natural environment. Because the moment you walk the walk away from the wild towards intensive captivity, because that's really what it is, over multiple generations, going back up that ladder is really hard.
I mean, you might have already answered this question with that, but I have a question here from Imelda saying, what do you think of the elephants from Howlett's going to the wild?
Well, let me put it this way. I think even better zoos, and by better I mean those who really seem to place a high priority on the welfare of their animals, are recognizing that elephants in zoos is just a terrible idea. And I think that the guy who runs Howlett's, Damien Aspinall, has decided that you can't just keep on making small incremental improvements and thinking that that's going to overcome the problem. He's basically decided the only thing I can do to give these animals, and hopefully if they breed more future animals, a chance of a wildlife, is to take them to Kenya. And I think it's 12 that he plans to take there. And I hope obviously that it's a success. I hope it's a success for the animals. But from my perspective as a person who campaigns against traditional zoos, it's important because we will go from 50 something elephants in this country to around 40 elephants in this country. And I'm keen to see the end of the keeping of elephants in zoos, just as when in the late 1980s, early 1990s, we campaigned strenuously on the keeping of dolphins in dolphin area. And the government, cleverly actually at the time, did not introduce a ban because it was really hard to see how that was going to work. What they did is they said, no, you know, if you keep dolphins in captivity in the UK, you will have to do the following. These won't be optional. The pool must be at least this big. The pool must be at least this deep. And the 2 or 3 operators that were left, 4 operators that were left, all just went, no, that's going to cost us millions to redevelop our pools. And we got a call one day from a guy who said, I've got one of the dolphins. Would you like him? So we went, what? I said, oh, okay, let me have a think about that. So we went off and had a good think about it, looked at our bank balance, and we had a little post office savings book which was our dolphin account for our dolphin campaign. And it had about 500 quid in it. So we thought, yeah, that's got to be enough. Let's do it. So yeah, we took on a campaign to get Rocky, who was originally in Morecambe and was spirited away to Flamingo Land in a sort of emergency move by the guy who had dolphins at Flamingo Land, surprisingly. 3 females, and a male from Morecambe. We managed to get him into our care. I had to go to the High Court to do that because we had to demonstrate to the satisfaction of his honor, the judge, that this dolphin was legitimately ours. And I do remember, because of course we can't speak in the court, so I'm sitting in the High Court with our barrister, counsel, barrister, QC, talking to the judge, and the judge turns around and he said, so what you're saying is it's a bit like someone has come to my stable and taken my horse and put it in their stable, but it's still my horse, isn't it? And our QC said, yes, my lord, very, very well put, very good. Oh, well, then in that case, and gave us the rights back to our dolphin, and who we then flew to the Caribbean, to the Turks and Caicos Islands. And subsequently, we were offered 2 more dolphins, the ones in the Brighton Dolphinarium, Silver and Missy. And after some hard work, we took them to the Caribbean. And ultimately, after 6 months in a very large 80-acre sea lagoon, they were released into the wild successfully. And that was pretty much the last nail in the coffin of the captive dolphin industry in the United Kingdom. There are none now, and there haven't been since the early 1990s. And there's no real sense that we'll have more dolphinaria here. And it's a tragedy if you think about what life in a dolphinarium must be like for a dolphin. You're living in a concrete soap dish, painted blue for some reason that no one can fathom, except it looks better for us, asked to perform mindless tricks and maneuvers, and you live in a chemically controlled environment. You know, I would say if we were all sitting in a hall having this rather than on Zoom, and the hall caught fire and it's filling up with smoke, we'd all get out. Dolphin can have chlorine burning the skin off its body, and it cannot leave the pool, and it happens.
That kind of brings us onto a question. Actually, brings us, quite neatly onto a question from Rebecca. Rebecca actually is working on a podcast at the moment, kind of dealing with a lot of the issues, talking about captivity in zoos and aquarium. Mm-hmm. Sort of evaluating it from lots of different lenses in that podcast. So that's what she's getting a lot out of this chat tonight. And she says, from his experience, does Will think that zoos or aquariums have improved over time? Are they learning how to do better for the animals in their care and learning which animals are inappropriate to keep in captivity altogether? Are we sort of seeing changes in the way that zoos are operating an aquarium?
I mean, it would be a tragedy if they hadn't learned to do a bit better than they were doing before. I mean, that would be the most terrible indictment, Rebecca. The legislation has has made this happen. It hasn't always been a sort of voluntary process by the zoo fraternity off their own accord. Whether they've really grasped the understanding of what the priorities should be, moved with the times. I mean, I think what I'd say is if you compare the museum industry 40 years ago with the museum industry today, you would not be able to you would almost be unable to make a serious correlation, because the museum industry has absolutely embraced and grasped the opportunities for storytelling around artifacts, whether they're natural history or geological or historical or whatever. They have embraced the way of telling stories in a compelling, engaging, empowering way. And zoos have not. Zoos are constructually, the construct of a zoo, the idea behind it, simply hasn't changed pretty much since London Zoo opened in the 1830s. That the concept is not, practices of course have changed, understanding of animals to a degree of course has changed. I'm sure, as I say, heaven forbid if it hasn't, but nutrition for zoo animals must have improved in many cases. The environments that they're in are often sort of hard to change, even if we know more about the species. London Zoo is still 36 acres or whatever it is. It can't go, well, we're going to build a 10-acre enclosure for our X, because there is no way of building a 10-acre enclosure for anything. They're not going to get more land from royal parks, Regent's Park, that's for sure. And so I think the problem with zoos, and this is notwithstanding some people who work in zoos who I truly believe are very sort of genuine in their care and appreciation of animals, the idea is wrong. The idea is stuck in the past. And if the conservation dividend is small, even from the better zoos, and the education dividend is even smaller, because it's really hard to say whether a visit to the zoo, either informal, like you and me buying a ticket and walking around, or more formal through some kind of teaching opportunity, like a school class going for an afternoon. It's really hard to see how the zoo informs us. The teacher might inform the children. The teacher may well use examples from the wild. And I would argue that having been told how, for example, gorillas or meerkats live in the wild, to then go and see the same species in the zoo environment is actually almost counter-educational. I think it can undermine the kind of respect and a respectful agenda that the teacher might well be trying to impart. So I think you can tell great stories about wildlife and about animals and about the need to protect the planet, but you don't have to have a zoo to do it.
And tell us a bit about with storytelling, obviously, because Born Free isn't just work in zoos and work here in the UK, is it? We do lots of stuff in in many different countries. I don't know at the top of my head. I should know how many countries we're in, but
well, if you include the whole of Europe, it's over 50.
Over 50 countries.
Yeah.
How do you change the sort of the stories that are being told and how you're telling them when, for example, you're talking to people who perhaps live in Kenya and live alongside the wildlife? So instead of sort of talking about the captive thing, you're talking about something that's in their day-to-day life alongside. What are sort of the challenges of that, and how do you sort of engage with people, and what kind of issues are you engaging over?
Well, I tell you, one of the things that I've learned is that, generally speaking, people don't want to harm wildlife. There may be situations where there is an imperative. My family starves unless I catch and eat X, and I kind of get that. I mean, if I'm pretty sure, I mean, I'm virtually vegan, but I think we'd all be in a similar situation if it was, my family dies or we eat the guinea fowl. I'm afraid the guinea fowl is going to lose in that. But generally speaking, people don't want to have an argument, a confrontation with nature, but they don't want to be the victim either. So, and a good example I would suggest is, say, in southern Kenya, where we have this project working with the Maasai community, who are pastoralists. So this is all about livestock. They don't do any settled agriculture. They don't grow stuff. They have cows and sheep and goats. And those are their wealth. That is everything to them. The cow was, according to Maasai tradition, the cow was given to them by God. And the cow is a child of God. So they look after them, as well as they possibly can in really tough working environment. And one of the challenges they have is that at night time in particular, when they bring their cattle and their livestock back to the homestead and put them in what's called a boma, which is a ring of thorns. You may have seen this on various shows or even been there. Those animals are vulnerable to predation. A hyena gets in, a lion gets in, 5 goats are suddenly dead, a cow is dead. Next morning, everyone from the community gets up, grabs whatever they can, goes and finds a lion and kills it. And in those circumstances, nobody has won. The livestock owner has still lost livestock, and we've all lost another lion when lions are in a serious situation in the wild. There are, when Born Free was made, they estimate somewhere in the order of 200,000 lions across Africa. Today, it's 20,000 lions. 90% reduction in 50 years. So we have to sort of fight for lions, but we have to do it in a way that addresses the concerns and the needs of local people. So what we've been doing is we've been looking at that traditional ring of cut thorns, which is very easily penetrated. And we have said to them, look, if we, together with you, reinforce that with some simple chain link and a door, what do you think? And so far, more than 350 communities, so about 10,000 people, have signed up for this. They pay a quarter of the cost themselves, because it's very important in our opinion, that they have ownership of this. This isn't a handout, as the old expression goes. It is a hand up. And so we'll do the technical work. They'll dig the holes for the poles. They'll help us string the wire. We pull the thorns up against the wire so that you've got almost a double barrier. We put on a door, which is made of an oil drum, beaten flat, put on a little wooden frame and hinged using rubber tires, car tire sandals. So if it breaks, it's all very well to put on a lovely $25 brass hinge. And then when that breaks, it won't get repaired. You put on a no-cost flip-flop and it breaks, someone just goes and gets a rubber tire and cuts another flip-flop out and bangs it on, and your door's back in business. So we've done more than 350 of these. That's an investment of, they cost about £2,000 a piece. So that's an investment of 700,000 pounds, a bit more than that. And that doesn't include our staff or the team that goes down. That's just the building of the boma. So it's probably £1 million that we've spent doing these. But what's been the result? People sleep easy in their houses. The lions don't get in, hyenas don't get in. The amount of retaliatory killings has just, where these enclosures have been created, the number of retaliatory killings has disappeared. I mean, they are 98% effective. And so, you go and talk. I had this conversation with one of the elders from one of these manatas, and I said, so what does this mean for you? And he said, I will be sleeping with my wife. I'm not sure his wife necessarily thought this was the best idea, but it meant, what he was trying to say is, I no longer sleep outside with the cattle, with a spear, waiting for the lion to come. And then we've sort of built on that relationship. So now many of these 350 bomas have a fuel-efficient cooking stove installed. Very simple. They're made of clay. They cost about $30 each, with a little chimney, so that the little hut, the house that the people live in, and I've been in several, just doesn't fill with smoke, which causes eye problems for the kids and all sorts of stuff. So that's one thing. We also do some water catchment, water harvesting, so that there's drinking water. When it rains, you can save some of it and use it for drinking water. We've put up very simple, inexpensive solar panels and solar lighting, so that people after dark, kids in particular, can carry on with their homework. Remember, it gets dark pretty much bang on 6 o'clock, 6:15 every evening, and it gets light again at kind of 6 o'clock every morning. This is close to the equator. And so we've helped 10,000 people materially improve their lives and their livelihoods. We've helped approximately 80,000 head of livestock. We've had a mitigating impact on taking fuel wood and burning it, because that's the only source of heat and energy for boiling water and cooking food that there is. There's no gas, there's no electricity, there's none of these things exist. Although I did go to a meeting some years ago, rather a big posh meeting, where the marching band in all their whites was marching up and down as the rebranding of this national park was undertaken, and there were MPs and all. And this MP got up and he said, if you'll vote for me, I will bring electricity to every household within the next 5 years. And I thought, oh dear, because no, it just doesn't happen like that. We are off grid but really off grid. So we have to think of other solutions. So that's how we bring the storytelling, the practical help, the community and the conservation agendas together. And that's the best we can do. It's an imperfect world. I'm not in charge of the overseas aid budget. I'd love to be.
And obviously all of us here are, we're storytellers, and we're together in a community, supporting one another and hopefully elevating each other's voices and things. What can we do either as individuals or as a community to kind of to have impact in terms of conservation? And is there sort of true value in what we're doing as sort of, people that are either across social media or on blogs and filmmakers and stuff? What kind of impact are we having, and what can we do to, make that bigger?
Well, you're all plugged into social media and the different platforms. I mean, if you think back at how important you are, I would say remember what was happening 500 years ago in this country, 600 years ago, because the bard, the storyteller, would come to town with a musical instrument and would sit in the square and tell stories. Stories were not just stories, they were social commentary, they were the news, they were what was happening in another county that people had never even been to because people stayed in their own districts and communities. They didn't know. I mean, going to London was like, whoa, you are serious? You've been to London? It was huge news. And so for somebody to come and tell a story and give people a little glimpse of a vision of the world outside of the community that they're in was incredibly important. And I think that's what you do. I think you are the bards. You tell the stories, you change people's minds, or at least you open up their minds to the possibility of change. And I think that's what's the most important thing. It's like a train going through the station, and there's two people, and one person gets on the train and the other person stays on the platform. One of them is on a journey and the other one is going nowhere. So, and that lovely story about the two people walking down the beach, the little boy and the man, and the little boy is reaching down and picking up, there's just starfish all the way up the beach, and he picks up a starfish and he tosses it back into the water, and then he picks up another and tosses it back, and the man taps him on the shoulder and says, "Son, what are you doing? There are thousands of starfish. What difference is it going to make?" And the little boy picks up another and throws it back and says, "It made a difference for that one." So I guess we're sort of running towards the end, but I would say be the difference. You have a voice. It's yours. You own it. It's your individual voice. Make it count.
That's, certainly, what we're all aiming to do, I'm sure. And I'm hoping that, again, with our book, our Connections with Nature book, that we're bringing lots of those stories together and bringing them to people who, perhaps know one of us or a couple of us that want to kind of, I want to read this story by so-and-so in this book. And then what they take away is a whole book of 49 other stories and 49 other people that they haven't necessarily heard of or heard voices of. And hopefully we're sort of through that and through the community pages where we're shouting about who, check out this person, we're hopefully getting lots of voices out there. And we're not always speaking exactly from the same page or exactly from the same experience, but I think that's what's so important as well. And sort of what you've talked about there with different people that come from those different places and have those different perspectives. I think the important thing is to reach all those places and to keep engaged in conversations. And it's okay if we don't all come from exactly the same place, or that we just bring what we do know, what we do have forward to try and make as positive change as possible. I mean, I know some of the people that are on the call tonight have work in education, and some people have worked in zoos or do work giving educational talks in zoos. And I think the thing is that we're not always going to come from exactly the same place. But what we can do is listen to each other. And I think that's what's been such an inspiring thing about this community and the conversations that we've been having over the last year, is to hear each other and to keep sharing the stories that we do have, and see where we find those middle grounds, that little sort of increments of change and understanding with each other. And I don't know if there's any sort of parting thoughts or things that you'd like to add, Will, sort of encouragement.
No, I agree with all of that. I mean, I'm literally, my last thought is, Churchill put it rather well. He said it's so much better to jaw than to war. And so conversation, and a conversation is a two-way thing. Storytelling is storytelling, but a conversation is two-way. And if you're honest about the conversation, if you're truthful, if the conversation has integrity, then both sides should learn something, even if they don't agree, but they should learn something. So keep on telling your stories and keep on having those conversations. And it has been really lovely to do this, Kate. I mean, Kate only came up with the idea about 4 to 5 days ago, and here we are doing it for real. So just, again, technology allows us to do things that would have taken that poor bloke 700 years ago 30 days to walk from Nottingham to Southampton in order to tell the story on the sea coast.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm sort of, queen of last minute, but it always kind of works out in the end. So thanks everyone for facilitating that, and thank you, Will, for being, available at the drop of the hat like that.
Really lovely to see you. Have a very safe Christmas. Have a wonderful time. Tell some great stories around the thing. And if you want to find out anything more about Born Free, head for the website. There's tons of stuff on there. You may not agree with it all, but you can share it.
Thank you. Thanks very much, everybody. And have a wonderful Christmas, and we'll speak in the new year. Take care. Thank you.
Bye now.